All right, well, it looks like we're at time, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'll do some introductions first. My name is Ashley Stove. I'm a web developer here at Aptera Software, and I specialize in web solutions. So do a lot of websites as well as the backend software that supports that. You can contact me. My email is here. It's ashley.stove@outlook.com. If you have any questions after the session, or if you want me to send you some slides, I am more than willing to do that. I also have my good friend Eric here, Eric Potter. He is going to be helping me with some questions. So if you guys have any questions at any time during the talk, just shoot it to us in the Slack or in the chat, and he'll make sure to let me know. Also, plug for later, he will also be speaking here at 4 o'clock Eastern. So his talk is on humility, and I think it will be well worth your time to attend. So in case you didn't catch it, the title of my talk is Sustainable Accessibility. So we're going to talk about how to make your websites accessible, not only now during your, the development of your project, but also long after the project is delivered and out into the wild. So first, let's go over what is accessibility. When we talk about accessibility, especially when it applies to websites, a lot of times what we're talking about is an organization that put forth the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And from their definition, they said that following the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines will make content accessible to a wider range of people with disabilities. So we are trying to get the content of a site in front of a wider audience so that we can serve a wider range of people. Accessible websites want to make sure that the content of your website is consumable by everybody. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, or I've heard it called WAAG as well. That is a system of measure used to measure accessibility. So how accessible is your website? And these guidelines, they ensure that people of all abilities are able to consume the site. I know that when you're in the heat of development, if you had to, on the spot, think of a couple disabilities, you would maybe be able to name 2 or 3. But again, they're wanting it to be consumable by all. Some disabilities that they cover are blindness and low vision, deafness and hearing loss, learning disabilities, cognitive limitations, limited movement, speech disabilities, photosensitivity, and any combination of these. Okay, so these guidelines will ensure that that a wide range of disabilities are covered and are provided access to the website that you are creating. There's this really cool project. It's called the Visibility 93 Project. And they are trying to change the icon for disabilities and for handicapped. So you know that something is handicapped is accessible if they have a wheelchair symbol on their, like on the bathroom or on, any other sign like that. However, they said 93% of people who are disabled don't need to use a wheelchair. So that icon is kind of out of date. So they went through and they made all kinds of icons, and it just really emphasizes the wide range of disabilities that we need to keep in mind when we're trying to make our infrastructure and make our websites accessible to everybody. Now, a lot of times the argument will be, well, why should we just cater our website just to a small subset of people? Won't that make won't it make it less usable for others, or will that negatively impact any other groups of people? However, the WCAG points out that following these guidelines will also make your web content more usable to users in general. there's this really cool effect. I just heard about it last year and I loved the story. So it's called the curb cut effect. So in the 1970s, there was this group of students at University of California, Berkeley, and they all had to use wheelchairs, and they had to carefully plan their routes to be able to get to their classes, because there weren't any curb cuts, where the curb dips down so that it's briefly the same level as the road. Instead, they'd have like a 3-inch curb that they couldn't get over. So they decided to take things into their own hands, and they kind of became this renegade group who would go out in the middle of the night and they would pour their own cement curb cuts, and make sure that they were able to get around that way. They said that, the police had threatened them, saying that they would arrest them, but they never did. And it was a small thing. It really, really helped them. And it didn't really hurt anybody else. But from that small thing, a lot of people across the United States and across the world were saying, hey, like, we need to make our infrastructure more accessible for everybody. So that led up to in the 1990s when President Bush signed in the American Disabilities Act, ADA. A lot of times we'll hear accessibility, ADA, used interchangeably. But that prohibits discrimination, but it also mandates accessibility. Okay, so it mandates that all public services are usable and accessible to those with disabilities. So they had a really surprising effect. They found that everybody benefited from these curb cuts, not just people in wheelchairs. You have parents with strollers who are, pushing their kids around, and all of a sudden they don't have to hop a curb. I know, as I've got a 2-year-old daughter, having that ability to get a stroller around easily is very nice. Workers pulling heavy carts or travelers pulling luggage. So many people benefited from this one service that was initially targeted just for the disabled community. In fact, they did a study down in Sarasota, Florida. They went to this busy shopping mall, and they just observed pedestrians. And they found that 9 out of 10 unencumbered pedestrians, so people who didn't need the curb cut, they weren't pulling anything, they didn't need it for the wheelchair, 9 out of 10 unencumbered pedestrians went out of their way to use a curb cut, even though they didn't necessarily need it. So again, that goes back to the idea that, sometimes we think that if we target a certain group of people, that's going to negatively impact everybody else. Whereas we find, especially in this situation, that in fact, everybody else benefits. I found this really neat infographic through Access Lab. It says 100% of people will experience a disability at least part of their life. And how many of you guys have experienced this? You're out in really bright sunshine, and all of a sudden that website that you can usually use, the color contrast isn't enough and you can't read any of the text. Or let's say, you're trying to order food while you're riding as a passenger in a car, and it's really bumpy and you keep hitting the wrong button because the buttons are so small. Or let's say, you're really wanting to watch a video on Instagram, and you're in a really loud environment and you can't hear what it's saying. And you just really wish that they had text that you could read. Alcohol can impair cognitive abilities. Sleepiness definitely lowers your focus, and aging affects all of those things. So if you're trying to make a case for management saying, hey, we should make this website accessible, and they ask, well, how many people will it benefit? You could say everybody. It will help everybody. So there's another company called DK, or DQ. I don't know how to say their name. But they did some research on the kind of the numbers associated with accessibility. They found that 2/3 of purchases that were attempted by users who are blind were abandoned. Okay, that means that they tried to make a purchase and they just could not get to the end where they could actually complete that transaction. 70% of all websites were inaccessible, meaning that you could not complete the prime directive of the site. Let's say you're in e-commerce and your prime directive is to get somebody to buy that. That meant if you're inaccessible, that means that you cannot buy a product even though you want to and are trying to. And most significantly, they found that $6.9 billion are lost every year to accessible competitors. That means that somebody went to a site and tried to do something, tried to make a purchase, and they couldn't, so they went to another website and they spent their money there. Okay, so that is lost revenue in terms of your bottom line. So again, this is all just, building your case to management. Why should we care about accessibility? Why should we justify the cost of accessibility? So let's go through, I won't spend a ton of time on this because there's just so much, but let's go out through the basic principles of accessibility. So there's 4 key principles. Somebody came up with an acronym, and bless them, because now it's easy to remember. So you have perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So the POUR principles. And we'll go through each of these, but these are the key tenets that need to be in place in order for users to be able to use your website. So WCAG's guidelines, we're still going through this. Information and user interface components must be presentable to users in a way that they can perceive. So the goal is that users use their sense of sight, sound, and touch to be able to process content. That means that if someone is low vision or blind, that they're able to hear the website through like a screen reader. Or if somebody is deaf or hard of hearing, they need to be able to consume all of your content on your site through vision, through their site. The way to do this, first of all, easy, use semantic HTML. Make your H1s and your P tags and your buttons and your sections mean something. Don't just throw in a bunch of generic div tags and use styling to make them look how you want. When you're using a screen reader, they're able to jump between headings and say, okay, I want to jump down to this heading. Now I want to know more. I'll jump down to another heading level. Or even like Braille and assistive technologies are able to use that semantic HTML markup. Alt text. So having a description of the image that you're presenting, that way that if someone is low vision or blind, that they're able to tell what is going on. Images, graphics, charts and graphs, animations, they should all have clear, descriptive alt text. Color contrast. This is a huge one in terms of like having to work around it. But make sure that you have sufficient color contrast between the font color and the background. I just spent yesterday going through a site and trying to change all of the navy blue to a gray, and I just could not tell the difference between those colors. And so it took me a lot longer than it should have. But if that was navy blue on a black or a dark gray, it would have been really hard for me to read. So making sure that that contrast is sufficient so that everybody, even including low vision or colorblind, are able to differentiate. I linked a really good resource that I use all the time where you can just put in the hex values for the font color and the background color, and then it will tell you whether it passes WCAG. Field and form labels, make sure that it's clear what you're asking for when you ask them for input. Transcripts and captioning, make sure all of your audio and video have readable transcripts for all of the content. Allow text enlargement, make sure that you're able to zoom in on your website and have it still be usable. User interface components and navigation must be operable. That's the second in our POUR principles. We want all users to be able to navigate through your site, even if they can't use a mouse, even if they require extra time to process information, even if they navigate the site through assistive technologies like screen readers or Braille technologies, and even if they are photosensitive and prone to seizures. So you can do all of this by avoiding mouse traps and keyboard traps. If there's anything on your site that says like you have to be here until you fill this out, that's just going to throw people off. Provide enough time. Don't say, hey, fill out this CAPTCHA in the next 5 seconds, or else, you're going to be locked out. A lot of people need extra processing time in order to get past that. You should have several different navigation options. In addition to your navigation, you should have site search, sitemap, site index, combination of those in order to be able to navigate the site. So fun fact about screen readers is that they will just read the links on a page in order, which is fine, except for your header navigation is usually just like 500 links, hidden, but just this huge block of links, and to sit there and listen to a screen reader read through all of them is tedious. There's a really simple thing you can do. We will just throw a link at the top that says skip to main content, and it will jump the page down to the main content. And it can be, invisible to a regular user. It can only be visible to a screen reader if you wish. But it just is so much easier for everybody. And again, that's like one thing where you have to just set it and forget it and you're done. Flashing content. Don't put flashing content on your site. It's just a bad idea. If you just really, really want that flashing content, you need to make sure that it's below 3 times a second and it doesn't contain high levels of red. We think of, the old 90s websites with the blinking text, but also make sure that any videos that you have, especially if they autoplay, don't have that flashing strobing light. And then as you are tabbing through a site, you need to make sure that you have a visible focus on the element that you are focused on. So, a box around it, or, something that shows them where on the site they are as they're tabbing through if they're not able to use a mouse. Information and the operation of user interface must be understandable. So you need to ensure that your content makes sense and that the user interface is intuitive. Not everybody's going to have the same education level of experience when they come to, consume your content. And they're also going to have varying levels of computer literacy. They're not all going to have the same experience in navigating websites. So you need to make sure that your UI is intuitive, even for those who aren't used to using, navigating websites. You can do this by making sure that your navigation is consistent. Don't change your navigation from page to page throughout the site. Try to keep it all the same as much as possible. If your site relies a lot on acronyms and jargon and, maybe industry-specific terminology, make sure you, provide definitions, just provide a lot of context. Buttons should all be styled the same. If, every submit button on your site is a different color, it's going to be really hard to tell, what you need to do and how you need to do it. Provide instructions. So if you have a really specific way that you want them to do something, provide that text. You can do that in tooltips. Just make sure that they're keyboard navigable, and just give them all the information that they would need to be successful in navigating your site. So when, errors occur, make sure you present that clearly to the user so they know what's going on. And then also support different languages. Beginning of every project, just set that lang tag in your head and just call out what language your site is. And then if you ever have, let's say you have got a mostly English site and you set that English tag, and then, you throw in Spanish, for like a small paragraph, mark that as Spanish. That way a screen reader coming through knows to read that in Spanish instead of reading it in English. I was on Facebook the other day, and I've got a lot of friends from Chile, and they all speak Spanish, and I wasn't familiar with a word that one of them said, but I knew it was in Spanish. And I went to go translate it, and Facebook just had no idea. It wasn't anywhere near what it needs to be. And so I clicked, the button that said, hey, this is a terrible translation. And they said, well, do you want us to keep translating into Albanian? Like, well, it wasn't Albanian to begin with. So no, that would be great if you stopped doing that. So just, make sure that you provide context to automated screen readers on what language things are in. So final principle, content needs to be robust. It needs to be robust enough so that it can be interpreted by a wide range of user agents. There are so many different screen readers and assistive technologies out there. You can't test on all of them. You can't expect to know how all of them operate. But they all agree that they will operate in the presence of semantic HTML that's well-formed. So your job is to make sure that that the HTML that you have is well-formed. Any device, browser, platform, you design a site now, but they're going to come out with technology in 2-3 years that you can't really design for yet. So just make sure that you've got a good core base, and they'll be able to interpret it. So again, semantic HTML. Ensure that the markup is valid. There's validators out there that you can just throw your HTML into, and it will tell you whether it's able to be parsed. I know that a lot of our development tools are very forgiving in HTML errors, and they'll even, the modern browsers will say, like, we know what you meant. However, it's not really as well received by assistive technologies. You need to make sure that your markup is valid. So any non-standard UI components, let's say you have a really funky slider in there or something else, you need to make sure that it has name, role, value. So it tells the assistive technology what it is, what it does, why it does it. And then test. This is the biggest one, and this is the one that we're going to focus on, is establish a testing protocol that will be sustainable by your current team, by future teams, and by the people that you are delivering the website to. So I am going to take a drink. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to throw it in the chat, and then we'll go from there. All right, so again, if you guys have any questions, just throw them out, and we will get to them. So how are we doing? We, as the greater whole of humanity, how are we doing? So WebAIM, they have this project called the Web Million Project, and they take the top 1 million websites as determined by another organization, and they run their tester through it. Okay, so this is an automated test. This isn't them going in and manually testing. This is an automated test that they run. They found that on average, there were 60 errors per page of a website. That's a lot of errors. And that means there are 60 instances that are inaccessible to a user. That 98% of homepages had detectable errors. So almost all homepages had elements that were inaccessible to disabled users. 86% had low contrast text, 66% missing alt text, empty links, missing input labels, empty buttons, missing document language. What got me is that all of these things are testable. Not even tests that you have to set up and write yourself. They're things that you can just, grab a free testing tool and run it on your site. And a lot of things like the document language, it's a fix it one time and you're done. You don't even have to keep, checking and checking to make sure it's good. So why is this so hard? Why is it so hard to make websites accessible? Or why are we doing so poorly at it? First of all, there's the volume of compliance checks. I just threw 50 things at you guys, and that did not even cover everything in the WCAG guidelines. There's just so many things that you need to check for. So many things that you don't think about if you're, an able-bodied developer trying to trying to cater towards people who are disabled. There's training that's required not only for dev, but for QA, for designers, for business analysts, for everybody who has a hand in this project. Everybody needs to understand what accessibility is and how we can best design the site and create the site in order to meet that. There's so many nuances to accessibility. I don't know how many different checks there are, but there's got to be 200 or 300. And each of those has like 3 to 5 different ways that you can meet them. So it's just extremely nuanced. It takes a lot of insight into how users use your website in non-traditional ways. There's just a lot that goes into it. And then, so you get through the project, you've got it all done, and then you hand it off to the client. A lot of our clients, we give them tools so that they're able to manage the content on their own after we deliver it. A lot of the accessibility is very content heavy. Things like readability, things like, color contrast, and there's just so many things that we give them the power to change, but they can change it in a way that it renders the site inaccessible. So those are the challenges. Going all the way back to my title slide, sustainable accessibility. We wanted to find a way to integrate accessibility into our projects because it's the right thing to do. It's, helps everybody. It just makes the websites better. But I mean, there is an upfront cost, and we wanted to know a way to lower that cost while at the same time improving the accessibility of the site long term. Okay. So this is what we did. We had a project. We had a client who had legal requirements to meet WCAG 2.1 AA standards. There's 3 levels of accessibility. There's A, AA, AAA. A is the most basic. You've done your due diligence, whereas AAA is like you're probably actively targeting the disabled community with your product or your service. So they had the legal requirements to meet the AA standards. And that was largely based on their industry. That's just part of their business. They needed to meet that. So the project team consisted of myself and one other developer. I had prior experience with WCAG compliance. My coworker did not. And then it was a new website, which was nice. We were able to design it from the ground up. And it was going to be a CMS that we would deliver to the client, and then the client would be able to make content changes after delivery. Okay, so that's the background of the project, kind of the parameters that we were working with. So we set up a plan, and this is what we decided to do in order to ensure or to facilitate a kind of a smooth transition into accessible development. So first off, we started off planning for accessibility. We worked with the designers. We made sure that the designs were viable with all the standards, things like consistent navigation, color contrast, the site making sense as far as the user interface. When we were designing it, when we were planning, when we were creating stories on what we were going to do, we always had accessibility in the forefront of our mind. And then second, before we even started the project, my coworker found a tool that I'll go over later that provided automated testing for accessibility. It was a tool that we could run locally on our developer machines. We integrated it into our CI/CD pipeline so that every time we deployed new code, it would check it. And we also set it to check every single day for any content changes that might have broken accessibility. So automated testing, very important, run very often. And then we had regular manual testing. There's still a lot of manual testing that you need to do with when you're doing an accessible website. However, we were able to get away with bi-weekly meetings in the beginning, and then towards the end, we even spaced it out to monthly meetings where we would get together and manually test for accessibility requirements and make sure that everything was okay. Meeting every other week or once a month is way better than it was before, when we were trying to hand test all the accessibility and not planning for accessibility in the beginning. We've had projects where a large part of our budget was going towards making sure that things were accessible. And then delivery. We planned for delivery. We wanted to make sure that our client had the tools that they needed to run those accessibility checks. They were trained to make sure that they knew enough about accessibility that they weren't going to make content changes that just completely brought it out of compliance. So first up, choosing a testing tool. Again, I'm going to go over a tool that we used. I'm not saying that this is the end-all be-all tool. Find one that offers robust coverage of accessibility issues. You want one that checks for as many things as it can. That way it catches things, and then you don't have to manually test for them. It's really nice if you're able to integrate it into your CI/CD pipeline. Or you can have it run on a schedule. You can have something that you're able to set to run daily. Make sure that it provides helpful error messaging. If it could provide where in the code your error is, and maybe a snippet of surrounding text. And even if it can tell you which guideline it broke, that way you can go in and see how to fix it, right? And then also choose one that allows you to select a level of compliance. You don't want 20 errors every day that you don't need to meet because they're not part of AA guidelines. You want to be able to narrow those down to just the errors that you care about. So the tool that we use is called PaLOusa. Little background, A11Y, they took accessibility, which is 11 characters long, and shortened it down to A11Y. So that's how they came up with the name of PaLOusa. But it's a command line tool. It can find errors on web pages. It'll provide errors that you definitely need to fix, warnings that it thinks that, hey, this might be a problem. You need to go check that manually. And then notices for, hey, this is a good idea to do. It provided a snippet of surrounding HTML, so you can know where in the code it was located. It provided action items. Here's what you need to do in order to fix it. And it even provided a link back to the WCAG guidelines where you could read more about what you needed to do in order to meet that compliance check. It allowed you to, again, set the level of compliance, and it had some pretty robust reporting tools. It had options to generate a PDF, generate an Excel, pretty much gave you a lot of flexibility in how you wanted to consume those reports, which was especially helpful. My coworker and I, we would just read them in the command line. However, when we pass it on to the client, we were able to provide nicer reports for them. So first up, automate what you can, okay? Run your tests regularly. We even set a threshold for deployment blocks. So if we tried to deploy and it ran that check and there were more than 5 errors, it would completely block the deployment. There's no better way to annoy a developer into doing the right thing than to stop their forward progress. So, and that way you didn't get too far away from the code where the error is located before you got it fixed. That also ensured that you didn't have cleanup sprints or, technical debt that was kind of languishing out there that you needed to go back and fix. And then again, train the client to understand the test results and the mitigation for those errors. So automate what you can, but then regularly test what you can't. Okay, so first of all, understand the limitation of the automated test that you're using. Know what it can't test. Good examples of this are focus order. So you need to make sure that when you're tabbing through a site, you're not tabbing, here, then here, then here, then here, then here. It should go pretty much top to bottom, left to right. That's something that an automated test can't check for. Any text over images, make sure the contrast is sufficient for that. Let's say the text works for 90% of the image, but then there's one person wearing a white shirt and you've got white text, and all of a sudden that doesn't work anymore. So those are things that you need to test manually. I mentioned those weekly and biweekly review meetings. So it was biweekly during the beginning phases when you're really setting up the UI, you're really getting that the design down. And then towards the end of the project, we were able to go to monthly. So we use the meeting time wisely. We would use it to decide on solutions, not for discovering problems. So I or my coworker or QA, one of us would take on the responsibility that sprint of going through the site and manually testing and looking through everything and making sure everything was okay, finding any errors. And then we would come to that meeting prepared with a list of, hey, here are the 15 things that I think we need to fix. How are we going to fix them? That worked really well to, really use meeting time wisely and to really keep the forward progress going. Okay. So let's go back to the beginning with our challenges. So we mentioned the volume of the compliance checks being problems, the nuances of accessibility, the training required in the client handoff. So how did our solution address these problems? Volume of compliance checks. When we implemented that automated testing, that did the bulk of the work because we were using a competent tool. Okay, so we didn't have to check for everything. We had to check for the 10% of things that our automated tests didn't catch. Nuances to accessibility, we use that manual testing time to really drill into those nuances. It was a set aside time every sprint or every other sprint where we would really think about how our website is usable by everybody and to make sure that all of those nuances were being addressed. Training required. So I mentioned that I had prior experience. My coworker did not. We kept meaning to get around to actually doing some formal training, but we never really did get around to it because as he was seeing those, error logs, that was kind of his way of being taught about accessibility. Okay, so if you remember when an error would come up, it would say, hey, here's an error, here's where it is, this is what you need to do, here's a link to go figure out why you need to do it. And so he could go through and say, well, why isn't this color okay right here? Or why does my form need a label? Or any number of things. And so he could go in and look. And you go through enough of those things and then also going through those manual testing review meetings. And he kind of was trained on the fly to be able to provide an accessible website. And then, we mentioned that client handoff was always a problem. But those automated tests really helped in that they're kind of our babysitter now, right? So we don't have to be in there checking up every once in a while saying, hey, is your site still accessible? They don't have to be doing that either. They have something that every day runs and says, hey, you're good again today, great job. Or, hey, you changed something yesterday, it's no longer accessible, maybe go back and fix that. They, and they had training throughout the process as they listened to our decision making and were part of that decision making. And then, that testing tool was clear enough and it had good enough reports and context that, a lot of times, it was, content changes that broke things. And so they would say, oh, okay, I made this, blue, but it's on a blue background. I should go change that to white. Or if they had any questions, they can go back to us and say, hey, this is breaking and we're not sure why. Can you tell us why? So that the automated testing tool really did a good job of making that client handoff a smooth transition, and also making that the sustainability of their site easier on the easier afterwards. It made it more sustainable to maintain an accessible website, is what I'm trying to say. So caveat, if it sounds like I just handed you the answer to everything, take that with a grain of salt. It worked really well for us, but remember that, all of those developers who maintain all of those million most popular sites, they didn't go to work saying, hey, let's make something that doesn't work for 20% of our users. Okay, that's not their intent. There's no malicious intent behind, not making something accessible. The problem is that we're just living in able-bodied bubbles. Okay, we know it works for us. It works for us, and so we don't think about maybe it doesn't work for somebody else. So automated tests are great. Manually testing is great. But definitely get hands-on with assistive technologies. Download a screen reader. Try to figure out how to use it. Single switch devices, Braille keyboards. There are a lot of really cool organizations out there who might even host days where you can come in and you can use these assistive technologies and see how they interact. Even there's some really great videos on YouTube that you can find. I saw a really cool one the other day of how there's a blind user, and she showed how she posted to Twitter. And she had some really cool things that she could use with her phone in order to to tweet. And so finally, if possible, bring in users who require the website to be accessible and have them do hands-on testing. This is something we did towards the end with our project, is they had several members of the community who definitely needed the website to be accessible, and they brought them in and they said, hey, here's our site, it's almost done. What can we improve on? What can we do better? What are some pain points for you? And having someone who is familiar with the nuances of assistive technologies, who are used to navigating the websites, bringing their knowledge and their experience into your UAT process is really a very beneficial thing. So this process worked really well for us. It definitely can work very well for you, but remember to do your due diligence and try to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who needs your website to be accessible. So do we have a comment? Microsoft. Okay, so Elizabeth said, Microsoft made their accessibility fundamentals course available to the public recently. I highly recommend it. Yes, definitely. I hadn't seen that yet, so I'm really glad that you pointed that out. And she posted a link in the chat, so definitely go check that out. When I said that my coworker didn't do any formal training, we were able to get away with that. But if you have the time and you have the resources in order to go in and to train on how to do how to make websites accessible, I would definitely recommend it, because again, there are so many nuances, and how do you know what you don't know, right? So definitely thank you for that. Does anybody else have any other questions? Again, you can contact me if you have any questions. If you would like a copy of my slides, there's some really cool links in there. That curb cut effect article especially, I really enjoyed. It was through the SSIR, Stanford Standard, I don't remember. But it was really well written, and it had further implications than just accessibility. So I would highly recommend it. Do I have experience with tools like Axe? I haven't done Axe in particular, but I have done things like browser-based tools, so Chrome extensions. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Site Improve I've used before. That's one, again, that will scan not necessarily your code, but it'll scan your actual website page by page and give you a report. I think Axe, I've heard of it before. I'm trying to remember. I think that's another command line interface. And again, the guidelines that I gave in picking a good tool, those will apply for anything. I'm not saying that Pally is the best because I have not tried all of them, obviously. So, yeah, take anyone that you think will work for your organization, kind of measure it up against, some of the standards that I have put forth and also standards that you guys have as in your own project. Yeah, and Elizabeth said that Axe is made by, and I think it is DQ. I don't think it's DK. I don't know why I say that. It's made by DQ and is used in Google Dev Tools and Accessibility Insights. Yes, and I know Google has just has come out with some really good accessibility testing tools, which is phenomenal. There's so many resources. I mean, accessibility sounds like this big scary thing, but there are so many different resources that you can lean on to both learn, to test, to understand what needs to happen. You just need to go and look for it and not be too scared to, to undertake, this making your website accessible. Elizabeth also says she recommends checking out, scroll up. Checking out Andy is made by the Social Security Administration and is used in Section 508 Trusted Tester Training. And it's lightweight. Yes, that is awesome as well. Yeah, if you guys have any recommendations for testing tools that you've used and you've loved, definitely put it in the chat. Because again, there are so many different tools that you can use, and all of them have different abilities and shortcomings, and so yeah, that looks great. Very cool. Yeah, well, thank you guys. I'm so glad to be able to talk to you guys. I hope that this made it a little bit more approachable and not as scary, because it's not a scary thing. I hope that all of my 5,000 things you have to look for didn't make it sound scary. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to contact me. And I hope you guys all have a good day.